Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, but please call me Alex, and I'm here to talk to everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Today I'm joined by Abby Malvestuto, and I apologize if I garbled that a little bit, to talk about a product that she works with on called Prodly. Abby, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. I'm happy to be here, Alex. And no, you did totally fine with the last name.
Great, thank you. You're kind. So, for folks who are meeting you for the first time, could you share a bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So, I am the product marketing specialist here over at Prodly. So it's kind of my job to be the voice of our company. So when it comes to who we are, what we do, and what we stand for, um, I'm the one that kind of jumps in on that and then makes sure that our team, our company as a whole, is delivering that same message across the board.
Cool. So I believe that you categorize Prodly as a type of DevOps app. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's, I think, the easiest way to look at it, right? When we're talking about what we do and putting that within context that people would be able to easily recognize that. DevOps is a good category for it, but we do a little bit more than that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to get into.
All right, yeah, let's start at the top and work our way down to details. So, how would you define DevOps? It's just to make sure people understand. It's spelled DEVOPS, so two words like developer operations. I think that's
Yeah, developer operations, development operations. So really what it comes down to, and this is regardless if it's within Salesforce, outside of Salesforce, it doesn't really matter. Anytime that you are looking to make changes within your application, or really anything that you do, there is a certain best practice and certain process that is in place in order to make those changes. A lot of that boils down to the simple fact that if you try to make changes in your live environment, this is Salesforce, it could be any CRM, it could be any application, the people who rely on that live environment for their day-to-day activities could be affected if the changes that you are making negatively impact that environment. So a good example of this, let's even take a look at websites. So let's say that someone on your team says they would like to have a new element on the website, and your team says, you know what? That's a great idea. We'd love to do that. All well and good, except when you went to go do the thing and add that element to the website, no one bothered to follow best practice. And as a result of you putting that element on the website, the shopping cart now no longer works correctly, which is now affecting your income stream. So these are the kind of things that are kept in mind, all these different moving parts and moving pieces, when we're talking about the concept of DevOps, because it's not just the software aspect of things and the code aspect of things, the tech aspect of things, but it's also the human aspect of things. Like, how do we get multiple people within multiple teams, multiple departments in order to collaborate effectively?
that's a great definition. Thank you for that. So, how does Prodly then fit within the DevOps categorization?
So we like to kind of position ourselves more as a overall, I guess, high level application lifecycle management tool, right? DevOps is very IT intrinsic. It is very tech focused. So normally when people are talking about the concept of DevOps, the users who are part of that conversation are going to be your tech savvy users. These are your developers, your software engineers, anyone that is very code focused. And because of the nature of Prodly, Prodly App Ops in particular, um, we work with Salesforce. So Salesforce kind of throws a little bit of a wrench in the process of DevOps because Salesforce was purpose built to be clicks, not code. So when you're taking a look at how do you effectively manage a process that is traditionally done with code on a platform that is specifically meant to be not code heavy, for non-technical users to be able to also go in there and make the changes that they need in order to be more agile. And really the definition of that for anyone who is not familiar with this term is you need to make a change. How fast can you make that change and implement that change in order for your business to evolve and adapt? So where we see ourselves within that is the ability to have the best of both worlds, to have that DevOps process and make sure that you're following best practice and governance and compliance. A lot of our partners and customers have to adhere to very stringent guidelines. They could be healthcare companies, they could be, for a perfect example here, nonprofit companies, companies where their information, their records are very sensitive. So how do you manage changes to this environment and do it in a way that is meant to be clicks, not code?
So I'm dying to know, how do you do it?
Really what it starts with, we make sure that we are robust enough for developers, engineers, things like that, while also being intuitive enough for non-technical users, be them business users, Salesforce admins, things like that, where they are more reliant on the visual aspect of it and being able to click and drag and move things from point A to point B. So the core concept of what we do, we have multiple aspects to our suite. We've got AppOps release. This is your migration tool. This is what's going to help you move your records and your, well, it's really called metadata, but it's the structure of Salesforce from point A to point B. Within that, we also have something called AppOps test, which allows teams to go in and say, okay, now that we've developed these changes, now it's time to test that these changes are not going to negatively impact our environment as we move from sandbox back up into the live production environment. Within that, we are also working on tools for helping to build and analyze the entire way through. So that's at a very, very high level. That's basically what it looks like.
So if we were to dive a bit deeper then into the AppOps release, we talked about migrations, sandbox to production, sandbox to sandbox. What are some key considerations? I know I do have a bit of familiarity with your app, so I know that it can do it between one Salesforce org, like one client. But I also remember hearing that it can be done across multiple orgs. So if you are a Salesforce consultant, for example, and you have a typical recipe that you apply to one customer or one client that could be applied to another, you can do that with this tool.
Absolutely. So AppOps release kind of is structured around the concept of a data set, right? So if we want to get a little bit more technical and take a slightly deeper dive into this, everything within Salesforce kind of acts like a web, just like any other CRM. So you have objects, you have fields, and it is very hard to develop on an object or a field without it affecting other objects and fields, just because of the way that Salesforce is created. It's meant to be very relational. You can, look up the account record for any of your, in this case, donors, and you should also be able to see households and see, who is within that and all of their information. But in order to develop a database like this, it requires a lot of finagling on the back end when it comes time to update and develop with it. So within Prodly AppOps, you can say, okay, I'm going to create what's called a data set. Within this data set, these are the objects that I care about moving. Okay, let's take the basics: accounts, contacts, and opportunities, for example. In order for you to move one account record, that account record is usually attached to the the contacts within that account, any opportunities that are open for that account. There could be something like cases within NPSP that could be, just as I mentioned earlier, your household, your donors, what campaigns are they attached to? When was the last time they donated? All of those records. So once you've gone through and developed, these are the objects that I want to move, you can essentially save that. And then that becomes your rinse and repeat. Once you've created this data set, that is your formula for moving the objects and records that you care about. And then from there, you would essentially tell Prodly, all right, I have my formula. All I have to do is change point A and point B. And in a lot of cases, you could also say, well, based off of this formula, this data set, I would like to move it from point A to multiple locations. We allow you the ability to seed up to 5 sandboxes at the same time using these data sets. And then the time savings of being able to move data and metadata together at the same time.
And this is really I think one of the strengths of your app is that if you didn't have something like this, if you used, for example, the out-of-the-box Salesforce data loader, in order to bring across data from one instance of Salesforce to another, if you wanted to do, for example, the accounts and contacts, and each account had multiple contacts, and you know that each contact may have an association to another organization, all these relationships, as you mentioned, have to be done in piecemeal. You first do, let's say, accounts, get all the IDs that are generated from Salesforce when they're created, and then update the contacts, the related contacts, keeping in consideration that ID that you got before. And it's a process you have to repeat multiple times for each of these kinds of relationships. And it gets very technical. I mean, somebody really has to know what they're doing. It's almost like doing surgery where you're removing a spine from one person and putting it into another person, or you have to reconnect all the individual nerve endings. Versus what I'm hearing is that you have now a recipe. You're just saying, yeah, take all these guys. Here are the relationships. And we define those relationships by clicking, not by defining nothing further than clicking. And then the app itself takes care of the relationships between data.
Absolutely. Taking the step back from this, right? So Prodly was built on the backbones of CPQ. So the person who developed CPQ, Dan, or Max and Dan, they actually went through and said, you know what, it is such a pain to be able to move, records and objects within this because of how complex and relational it was, that they needed to have a better system in place besides something like data loader, change sets, or hiring very costly and not time effective developers to try and get in there and strong arm their way through it with custom code and things like Jenkins and things like that. So they created Prodly to be able to move CPQ. And from that, I mean, we started as Mover. So there are some people out there that still know us as Mover because that's what we did. Now we're so much more than that. But that's the foundation of what we do. So we allow that ability to say, okay, we understand that Salesforce as a whole is highly relational. So it makes sense that if you're going to move records and objects and things like that within Salesforce, you need to have a system in place that understands that. So probably one of the bread and butter aspects of Prodly AppOps, in this case, AppOps release, the release portion of our tool suite, is that anytime we are moving records, Prodly will track everything for you. We take a look at the record IDs. We don't need to have a third person or a third party to sit there and be like, okay, well, the record ID is going to change 15 times. When you move it from point A to point B, it's going to change. When you move it from here back into UAT, it's going to change again. And let's say, and this is best case scenario, if it goes from your lowest environment, your dev box, up to partial, up to UAT, and up to production, that record ID has changed 4 times. So who is tracking all of this? And you're spending time and resources manually tracking those things instead of having a system like Prodly to track it for you. And if it doesn't work, if that particular element at any point in here was not kosher with someone else's code, and you have to go back through and start at the beginning, record ID changes 6 more times. So yeah, we take the headache out of pretty much all of that. We understand, at least, and this is especially so with nonprofits, that our customers do not have. They're always trying to look for, how am I going to do more with less, right? It's a matter of, we need something that's going to be quick, efficient, and to get it right. Otherwise, you are at the mercy of something like data loader and change sets. So you have to load this in, and then you have to manually go through and connect all your stuff, just as you were saying. And change sets is absolutely the worst. We're trying to do that with metadata, because now it's a very manual process trying to do all of those things.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with that analogy of surgery, of trying to transplant a spine
That's
from
it.
one person to another, because that really, it can get that complicated, or it
Oh,
feels
yeah.
like it gets that complicated.
Oh, absolutely.
But just to go back for a second, just because some of my listeners might not understand or know what CPQ stands for, it's configure, price, and quote. And this is basically a
Yes.
module provided by Salesforce to help you do very advanced quoting. If you have a whole product structure and price books, this is a module that you can add to really make your life a lot easier in deciding which products go with which products. It's not really used so much for nonprofits, but the underlying idea here is that it's very it's driven a lot by data, rather than a lot of other parts of Salesforce, which are driven by certain functionalities within Salesforce. CPQ from the beginning took a data-driven approach, and that makes it very, very reliant and very heavy on data. So I understand, like, you basically took the worst case scenario, so to speak, of how to manage data, found and built a tool that handles it, and then everything else becomes child's play. So that's really great to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
The second thing is, I wanted to mention just also a technical note about record IDs. So for those who may not be so familiar, in Salesforce, when you're working with multiple sandboxes and then your final production environment, each of these environments has their own Salesforce record ID, and they're unique to that environment in one direction, at least. If you're copying from a production environment and creating a new sandbox, you could have some data that's pulled from production that continues to have the same Salesforce ID or the same Salesforce record ID. But if you're generating data for the first time in a sandbox, in a development sandbox, that account ID, that contact ID, that specific ID for that person or that account will not be the same as when you move it to a test environment, and it will not be the same when you recreate it again in production. So the ability for Prodly to be able to track all these IDs across all these different sandboxes and in production, again, it takes the load off the person doing the work and empowering the tool to do it for you.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'd love to hear was that, yeah, I mean, especially for the non-profit market, generally the people running it aren't so technical. So again, having this tool that allows them to do all of this powerful activity really quickly without having to rely on a developer or someone who has a more advanced skill set, that's music to my ears. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, that's kind of the sweet spot that we have found ourselves in. Because across the board, we're, especially during the pandemic, we saw so many instances of, again, people trying to do more with less. And oftentimes that meant relying on, more non-technical users in order to do the very simple things of, I just want to add a new field. I just want to add a new field to this record. I still have to go through and follow best practice to do that. But now I feel like I'm being bottlenecked in my process doing that. And it's preventing us from being able to do faster and do more. So that's definitely where Prodly has stepped up. And I think a lot of people have started to realize that, again, especially during the pandemic.
So up until now, we've been talking mostly about data, but you also mentioned Prodly handles metadata too. So it basically serves as a kind of replacement for change sets.
Yeah, yeah. And this is where the conversation starts to get really interesting, because Prodly, from a metadata perspective, could be seen as being a little bit late to the party, right? Because we were so focused on being able to get the data portion correct, because it's significantly harder to get the data side of development correct, that metadata kind of became, a back seat, right, as part of the conversation. So now that we have our foothold very well within data, we decided to take a look at how can we take our vision, which was, again, to be able to, give teams the best of both worlds, the ability to adhere to DevOps best practice while keeping the low code mission of Salesforce alive, And how do we apply that to metadata? So it's no secret that there's, a lot of other companies and people out there that are doing metadata. But what it comes down to for non-technical users, they're not very friendly in doing so. We wanted to make sure that we kind of stood out in that sense by saying, you know what, I don't want to have to see or compare a single line of anything that looks remotely like code. So how do we take the process of developing metadata, which is, you're going to be developing metadata within Salesforce way more frequently than you would be doing anything within data. And how do we take that already headache-inducing process and, kind of, I guess, put the power back to the non-technical users? Because even for non-technical users, using something like change sets is still a headache. For people who are unfamiliar, trying to make metadata changes within Salesforce and using a change set to do it is a very time-consuming, headache-inducing, painful process. Because even though Salesforce provides this as a method to do that and change and update your metadata from point A to point B, there is still a lot of manual work that has to be done behind the scenes, and it's not very collaboration friendly. It still requires you to manually track exactly what it is that you've changed and when you changed it and who changed it, and a lot of outside collaboration with teams in order to make sure that you're not accidentally moving certain metadata components that are going to negatively impact someone else's work. The risk of override is there. The risk of not getting it all the first time is there. The first time that you move it, I mean, is there. So Prodly developed our metadata comparison tool to be a true upgrade to change sets. It's not code heavy. It doesn't make people reliant on source control. Basically what this means, guys, is a lot of teams, right, will go through and connect these systems to something like a repository, something like a GitHub, in order for them to say, okay, well, if I'm making changes here, I basically want to have a save point. Think about it like a video game. So if you're going to go through, you save your progress, and then you play some more of the game. And that way, if you die at any point in this game, you can just go back to your save point. Well, source control is sort of like that. But the problem is, not every single team is ready for a paradigm shift like that, because again, we're talking about more technical versus less technical. And Prodly understands that that is sometimes seen more as a sliding scale and less as a checkbox. Are you a technical user? Are you a non-technical user? So as a whole, AppOps says, regardless of where you're at on this sliding scale, we can meet you there and help you either grow from that, because we needed to make sure that the metadata tool, also the data tool, was going to be scalable, because companies that start out with 10 employees a lot of times don't plan to end as a company with only 10 employees, right? A lot of these companies want to be able to grow and evolve. So we need to have a solution that kind of does all of that. You'll see it more in the demo. It's really hard to explain without seeing it. But really that's what it is you go in and you say, okay, this is my point A, this is my point B. These are the metadata components that I've been working on and that I care about. I want to visually see the changes that I've made, who made them, what was changed, what fields, what components, subcomponents. That way you can see in an instant at a glance, this is what I care about moving. That way you don't have to worry about anything super technical.
Yeah, and just to take a step back, because I think we touched upon it before, you mentioned it, metadata, what a definition of metadata is. So within Salesforce, it just basically means the structure. It's how things are put together, and the data is the actual records, your actual contacts. So a first name, a last name, these are examples of metadata, versus the data, which is your, Alex and Lapa is your actual data. So that's basically the two focuses of Salesforce and these kinds of migrations is your data and metadata. So now that Prodly can handle both, I mean, it becomes a one-stop shop basically for these kinds of deployments.
Yeah. Yeah, because again, the alternative to that would be you'd have to use data loader for a bunch of other things and then still manually go through and connect all the dots. And then you'd have to use change sets for a whole different set of things and go through that entirely separate process. And so sometimes, and more often than not, we've seen companies where they've had to develop two separate teams in order to get the job done, because asking one or two people to kind of do it all without a resource like Prodly was turning into a headache.
As for someone or for someone who's done a lot of change sets in my time, let me tell you, it is a pain in the butt. And there's a good chance of error along the way, and you have to keep very detailed records of what was changed, what was not changed, because it doesn't guide you. It basically it tells you here's the absolute minimum for you to be able to move metadata from one instance of Salesforce to another. Good luck.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's wonderful to see, a tool like Prodly to be able to say, "Don't worry, we got you, and we'll guide you along the way."
That's a really good point too, is the guiding process, because we do maintain that aspect of we want to make sure that even our non-technical users are feeling like they are supported in using our tool. There's a lot of checks and balances in place that say, hey, if you're going to select this thing, you might also want to think about selecting this thing because it's dependent on that. So we make sure that as you're using this tool, we can come through and make sure that you are truly seeing and moving everything that you care about.
Awesome. So that's basically covers the high level, at
Mhm.
least, the app ops release. Then you mentioned also app ops test to help test making sure that whatever you are doing, whatever you are migrating, doesn't negatively impact something else. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah. So this is more along the lines with the CPQ aspect of things. We're in the process of building out the rest of the test product to be able to support other things within Salesforce. But as of right now, AppOps test is just for CPQ. But as a high level for anyone else that's hearing this that might also be using something like CPQ, it's a regression testing tool. And the idea of regression testing, just again, high level within DevOps as a whole, says I have made a change. I have now pushed this change. Let me test that these changes that I have moved are not negatively impacting the new environment. Are there bugs in the system? Things like that. That's all there. Part of that is also automated checking. So we know that at least within the CPQ app, anytime Salesforce makes an update, you've got a 50-50 shot if that also somehow negatively impacted the CPQ application. So we allow our users to be able to set up automated and schedule tests, I should say, to go through and say, okay, well, I know that Salesforce is going to update on Wednesday. So I will schedule a test to run Wednesday before anyone even gets in the office. That way, as soon as I get in the office, I can say, are my quotes still working? Are my approvals still the way they should be? Is everything calculating as it should? So on and so forth.
And I got the impression that you plan to expand this to beyond just CPQ.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely on the roadmap for us to do that. Probably not in like the immediate, probably like few months or anything like that, because we're trying to get to a point where we can release more frequently as well. We do releases now. I think it's every 4 months for major releases, but we try to push smaller things through. So I don't see that happening in like the immediate future, but it's on the roadmap for us to do because we've had so many requests for people to be able to use it.
In terms of partners, I know that you have one way of outreaching and getting your message out there is to work with partners.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I found very attractive about your offering is that you actually make this product free for partners.
Indeed. We understand that you know the way that partners use our product is kind of best case scenario. They would be true product champions to be able to go through and use our product the way that it was intended, not just, hey, I just need to move a few records every 3 months. Like these are going to be users that are actually going in there, getting their hands dirty with it, and really helping see our vision come to life. And then to be able to pass that on to their clients and their customers when they go through and say, you've done a really good job maintaining our environment. We are ready to pick up after you're done with this project. Who did you use in order to maintain all of this? Make it look so easy. Then the partners can come back and say, yeah, we used Prodly. So for us, it is absolutely a win-win whenever we are, talking about using this with partners. So we do offer that for free for partners. And then along those lines, for nonprofits, we understand the situations that nonprofits are in. And again, it's that concept of trying to do more with less. We make it a mission to, like, we believe so strongly in our cause. We like to help other organizations believe in their cause as well. So we do work very closely on pricing with nonprofit organizations.
That's awesome. So if I understand the model correctly, is that one of the ways to learn about Prodly is basically for a nonprofit to work with a partner that they already have,
Hmm?
for that partner to be a Prodly partner as well as a Salesforce partner, implement it or use the app, and then if the nonprofit came back to the partner and said, "This is great, I really would like to be more self-sufficient," or what tools or what processes that we can use that you've been using, can we take over? The door is open for you then to make that connection directly with the nonprofit and then take over from there, right? So I imagine you must have some kind of support structure to be able to support them going forward, or is it normally you would continue working with the partners in the middle? How does that work?
Yeah, so this is something that comes up a lot is there's basically a transition process. So when a partner comes through and says, hey, the client that we've been working with is ready to start being a little bit more self-sufficient, they're really excited to be able to do that. We told them about you, they want to pick up where we are leaving off. Then we have a series of meetings where we will meet with the potential customer client. We also meet with the partner and say, okay, let's figure out where ground zero is. Where are you? How far have you come? Let's take a look at your landscape. It's a whole process that involves making sure that the partner is doing the least amount of work during this transition. They're pretty much just there to say, yes, this is what I've done so far. And that way we can get, see their landscape, because essentially that landscape is being maintained by the partner. So the partner would actually be the one pulling that up and saying, this is what it looks like. But we handhold throughout that whole process. We provide partners with all the necessary collateral to be able to talk about Prodly. We provide partners with the assistance in the transition. So that way it's not on the partner to be able to do all of this because they have enough on their plates. We know that. And then once the project is over, we have an entire onboarding in place for the customer in order to make sure that they are fully confident using the tool.
It's rare to see such hand-holding and white glove type of service. It's lovely to see, especially for people and for businesses that are not so technical like nonprofits. So I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, again, the process of DevOps and application lifecycle management is already such a headache inducing thing. And it's already such a complicated process. We don't want to make it more complicated than it already is. So if there's anything that we can do in that process to make it seem not as intimidating to people, then it makes our lives easier because when people are adhering to DevOps best practice, then everybody wins.
And so many other, I know a couple of competitors, and it's basically, here's a tool, have fun with it, and here's, you can look at a wiki or some videos to teach yourself. They don't have this level of
Oh,
support. So that's kudos to you.
thank you.
In terms of roadmap, could you talk a little bit about what you see or what the plan is for Prodly in the next coming months to get people excited about, looking forward?
Yeah, so ever expanding, ever expanding. So right now, we have already launched our guided deployment tool. And a huge UI change because we wanted to make sure that we are constantly keeping the UX in mind. For anyone unfamiliar with that, we want to make sure that the user experience is top of mind for us. We want it to be as intuitive and easy and quick to use and implement as possible. So with that, the guided deployment feature we launched recently, which allows people to go in there and say, this is the data set I've been using, just point A, point B, also C, D, E, F, if you wanted to do it that way. Being able to move data and metadata together in that same screen, that whole thing. Within that, we are constantly looking to expand on our metadata capability. We are offering source control, as we mentioned before. So our more technical users that do want to have that save button, we have that, and we're always going through and expanding that. Um, Within that, we are looking to expand again our build and analyze tools. This would help integrate for, again, our slightly more technical users, if they wanted to integrate with outside resources, maybe they're using something like Atlassian or whatever the case is, things like that, where it's more user story focused use cases, I guess you can say. People that are used to going through and saying, okay, well, this user is saying that they would like to have this field on this object, and this is why. They can turn that into, tickets and being able to move those things around. That's all stuff that we've got kind of floating in the ether, that we're looking to turn into a reality. But our biggest focus right now is just making sure that the tool is going to be as easy and user friendly as possible as far as roadmap is concerned.
Awesome. So listen, this has been great. Where can people find more about Prodly on their own?
I would definitely suggest that people go to www.prodly.co. All of the information is there. We recently just relaunched our new website, so we have way more information on there this time. One of the many hats that I'm wearing, I'm developing the guided product tour that we're going to be launching on the website this week. So people that want to actually get in there and start clicking around and see what it looks like, they can do that. If they would like to request a demo and see what this looks like in person, and to be able to develop a POC, a concept to say, is this something that my organization can take advantage of? We also have all of that. And all those resources are available on the website as well.
Oh, perfect. So listen, thank you for joining me today.
Yes, thank you for having me. This was great. Any excuse that I have to nerd out about Prodly, I will.
I appreciate it. Thanks. All right, folks, that's all for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again next time for Agents of Nonprofit.